Awesome. Thanks, guys, for tuning in again for another day of Influencing the Shift 3.0. Today, our conversation is going to be all about how to promote inclusive sport. And with us, I think we have some bright minds in the room. So Mallory is my beautiful co-host, and so I'll let her kind of lead the intros.
Awesome. Thanks, Cassie. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. Like Cassie had mentioned, today's conversation is related to inclusion in sport. So let's start off by having a little introduction. Steph and Paul, if you guys could do a little bit about yourself and your experience in relation to sport and inclusion, that'd be excellent. Paul, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yes, thank you very much, Mallory. So I've worked 5 years as the parasport coordinator at Sport Nova Scotia. And I kind of learned on the job, I suppose. I don't have any academic experience as a rec therapist or anything. Fake it till you make it. But I do have first-hand experience as a person living with a disability. So I use a wheelchair and I play all the different sports. But when I got into my role around creating awareness around inclusion and adapted sport, I really found there's a wide range to be offered. There's a wide range of the population. There's a lot of different factors. It's not easy. But I also am a coach for a minor sledge hockey team where inclusion is non-negotiable. And I've seen the benefits of it, but it also can be pretty tricky as well sometimes. So definitely a lot to talk about.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Steph, a little introduction on you and how you know about persons with disabilities.
Cool. Thanks, Mallory. Yeah, my name is Steph Spencer, and I'm the community sport lead for Sport Nova Scotia. So obviously there's a role within my job looking around access and inclusion for persons with disabilities. Often it's with the parasport lens, but it can also be with the person with intellectual disabilities lens through programs like Special Olympics or Challenger Baseball. And my really involvement started probably when I was in university, working with people with disabilities. I was fortunate enough to take part in a couple of programs through St. FX, the Motor Activities X program to start off with, which was basically a physical activity program after school that kind of tied in a number of aspects, which was great, and really kind of got me into saying this is something it's really hard to walk away from. It was just a wonderful experience. So I ended up being a large summer camp counselor for a couple of years in Antigonish as well. I've done a lot of work around Special Olympics, a little bit on the coaching side, but mostly on the support side for both traveling and then as well as events for Special Olympics, provincial and national games. I've done a little bit around some wheelchair basketball officiating. I taught phys ed for a couple of years in a different world for about 5 years, and I had some both integrated and community living phys ed programs. So to Paul's point, there's a lot of things that's really positive, but there's also some challenges with it as well. So there's some really different hats I've been able to wear kind of along the way that give me a different perspective and appreciation for accessible programming. And again, I don't have that direct contact like Paul does, but through a number of different programs and supports, it was there. So I think there's huge opportunities and there's a lot of good support now. And I think that we're looking at it in a really neat way. And I also think it's neat to see how it kind of grows in the community as well. I mean, our community in Antigonish is one that's relatively strong, I believe. And now I see my kids volunteering with Challenger Baseball program as well. So it's a really neat kind of transition, and there's great ways to support it, but it's also, you need to kind of figure it out in advance to see how you can best do it too.
That's awesome.
Well, I think this will provide some great conversation. Steph, great to hear that your kids are following in mom's footsteps. Love that. Cassie, I'll pass it over to you to get us to dive into the questions.
Thanks, Mallory. And yeah, I think like to Steph's point too, like Paul and Steph, like you both bring these unique perspectives. And I think that's why it's really cool to have you both present for this conversation. So thanks again for joining. And just like a little bit about like why promoting inclusive sport was kind of a topic for Influencing the Shift. Public awareness was identified by the CSOs as something that is hard to do. So like, if they even tried to attempt to create an inclusive program or promote an inclusive avenue or try to engage in that conversation, they found that the individuals they were targeting didn't always actually come, and so how can they promote an inclusive sport when, they feel like they've gotten to that point, the training's been done, you know, X, Y, Z, and now we want to get the people through the door. So in knowing that, you know, many community sport organizations identified that public awareness is an area of improvement. So can you speak to your experiences and how do you find out about inclusive and accessible community sport opportunities? And Steph, I'll hand it over to you to start this conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And ideally, I'd love to say it's super easy. Just simply either Google search it or connect with your community sport access navigator and go. But reality is that that's far from it. Often your information can be presented in a bunch of different ways across a bunch of different mediums. That's the reality of kind of where we're at in community sport right now. You might have some organizations that offer standalone programs that are targeted to certain groups. You might have programs that are integrated into the ongoing program that are just simply saying, well, we'll make sure that it is inclusive and we do support you. But how it's communicated again is not consistent. So for the user, sometimes it can be very difficult to navigate to what level of inclusivity there actually is within a program. And often sometimes within like one-off programs, you'd say, okay, if it is a program like a Challenger Baseball, well, there's probably really good supports and resources there to help support that participation of the individual. But sometimes if you say maybe it's just a baseball program that is accessible, well, what does that actually mean and how is it actually inclusive? And sometimes, unfortunately, that it depends on the organization as well, on their experience and their level and their experience in supporting people with disabilities. So sometimes you can have a great experience and a lot of things are set up proactively in advance. And unfortunately, sometimes that you say we're inclusive and we support everybody, but the reality is both the capacity and the experience of the organization might not have that. And unfortunately, sometimes when you don't realize that until you actually get to a program, and unfortunately, again, sometimes that when you realize that, then sometimes you don't end up coming back if you're the person that has additional needs. So that's one of the pieces, looking at saying, how do you be proactive about the information you share and the supports that are there to ensure that when we do get into the program, it is successful, or if it's not, we're aware of them in advance and we're able to create either resources or supports or connections within the community to make sure that they are there and present for when the participant gets on site. So it is really a bit of a mixed bag, which is definitely tough to navigate. So it's hopefully, I think we're getting ourselves a little bit better in the direction of the information in more concise ways and shared across more forms. But I still think we have a lot of work to do to make it better to the end user as well.
Yeah, well, definitely. And Paul, what are your thoughts on this?
Mic drop. Yeah, you just said it a lot there for sure. Let me go first next time.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot to talk on there. I think everyone's perspectives and their expectations and what they think their capacity is. And then other people show up and they come with their own expectations, perceptions, and there's usually a gap. Sometimes you exceed it and sometimes you don't even meet it. And then like, so to go back to your original question, I guess, like these CSOs are trying to offer these programs. And then like what kind of programs? There's like exclusionary programs where it's all similar types of disabilities. But then there's also the push for a greater inclusion where everybody of all abilities can play together. And both are possible, but there are challenges and pros and cons to both. So like you can't play like wheelchair basketball with stand-up basketball because you'll probably get injured in the same with sledge hockey. So it makes sense to have like an exclusionary program for just those people in that type of equipment. You could play like tennis or table tennis. Those kind of things you can play as inclusion. It's no problem at all. So really kind of knowing the education around the sport and the risks. So we always want to have like safety. So as long as you're choosing like a safe activity for that level of impairment, kind of gives you the envelope in which you're going to work. So then once you know like who your audience, because it's hard to reach the cognitive, like sensory, and then the physically disabled, like all together with able-bodied, and just present this program that's going to work for everybody. So kind of like work, like knowing your strengths and just playing to those strengths and make sure that that's quality so that you can, when people do show up, you're going to have that quality product.
Paul, something you said that stuck out to me, sorry, like I just want to backtrack for a second. Like you were saying like how, yeah, like wheelchair basketball, sledge, it just makes sense that it's kind of exclusionary in the sense of, everyone's into sledge. But I'm curious your thoughts just too on like how can we promote that as a organization to still like everyone want to join that experience.
Well, I'm glad you asked. Yeah, because all abilities are welcome. So you have able-bodied people playing wheelchair basketball and playing sledge hockey. So then it is an awesome sport. And at the end of the day, it's always that freedom, the quality of the sport will sell itself. People will come back for either socialization or they just enjoy that, playing the movement and the mastery, those kind of things, or the independence that it gives you. So how do you promote like disabled sports to able-bodied people? Is that what you're kind of asking? I don't know. There's no one that you can't force people to care. Like if they have a connection or something like that, they're more apt to understand and learn. And then through media or like good promotion, it could look really cool. So why people will go into it, it's hard to say. Like usually it's a friend or some sort of connection, or they're university students. They want to learn more, all the experiences they can. So for that, I would say that's who I see most of the time showing up.
Okay. So. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. It just kind of like stuck with me while you're speaking to that.
No, I'm glad you asked. Yeah, that's good. So yeah, I would just say like really know what your strengths are, and then like sell those. And then the other things that maybe you're going to learn on the fly, just be really open and honest and always critical about how you're delivering your program. And that requires a lot of communication with the participants, the leaders, and things like that. And it's constantly like researching on the internet, what's going on in other places. Mentors are fantastic. There's so many people who want to tell their story about their successes, so they're out there as well. So I would say just like promote what you're good at and then start working on your weaknesses. It takes time. It's word of mouth as well. And just because you build the perfect program doesn't mean everyone's just dying to like come. And like it's going to take time for one or two people to go, and then okay, other people are watching, and then the next year maybe you double. And yeah, like it could take like 3 years to have like consistent 8 people at a program, and that would be successful. And we always compare everything to able body, and that wouldn't be a successful program there. So you really have to change your expectation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. And like I see it all the time where like it does take longer sometimes with these specialized programs where like you almost have to build trust with that community to really get that engagement piece you're looking for, that, quantity of numbers and whatnot. So to your point, it does take more time, but it's worth it.
For sure. Yeah. The benefits are obvious, like the same kind of benefits: better quality of life, stronger, happier, socialized. All those things are the same.
Exactly. Awesome. So Paul, I'll let you start off the second part of this question, just so you have a chance so Stephanie doesn't steal your thunder.
Right. Oh gosh.
Stephanie, you can't steal no one's thunder.
I definitely can't steal Paul Tingley's thunder for sure. So I totally get that. Yeah.
Of course you can. Yeah.
Has there been experiences where you've come into a space not realizing the organization offered an inclusive sport opportunity? Or like alternatively, where you went into a space like thinking they did, but then it didn't but then it maybe didn't meet your expectation of like an inclusive sport opportunity. So kind of, the contrasting in that.
Yeah. So I had the experience of becoming disabled when I was 24, and I didn't know anything about adaptive sports before that. So I really like the first part of your question. I had no idea that all these sports were adaptable. So I went in and I just started going through. I knew I was going to be active, so I started looking at all the sports and realized that all of them were pretty much adaptable. So that was really like, oh, good, like we can have some fun with this. So now the second part is that, there's barriers all throughout all the sports and programs, right? We're not at the level. And it's tougher in Nova Scotia with resources and getting all the people together. Like you need a mass of people to kind of make it that quality experience. So we do the best we can, but with the limited population and resources. But there's still sports like tennis. When it's done properly, like it is fantastic experience. And that's a good sport because you don't need the huge amount of people. It's something you can play in rural, in the city, and you can play with able-bodied, with other disabled people. So that's sometimes the sport really, well, your success depends on what the activity is, but then you also have a $6,000 wheelchair that you need to get to buy to do it as well. So that's a barrier. But like there's other sports where I went to wheelchair basketball and there's like 2 people and there's no team, there's no coach, like there's no one to play. So we were just doing layups for an hour, and it's like, I guess that's a barrier, right? Because we didn't have like a good experience. So I could go through like skiing, like it's awesome, but like there's like a glass ceiling, like there's no competition, there's like limited equipment. So you get out there, but like it can be better always, but we're like zipping off the barriers. I did a little look at the internet there and I found this research paper. People have identified 178 barriers to participating in parasport, and they group them into 10 and stuff like that we're more familiar with. But like,
Wow.
there's not one barrier that you can just pick off and say, okay, we did that, now where are the people? Like, because it's complicated. Everyone's got their own story and what their expectations are.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for sharing your experiences. It definitely like, it helps to put things into like examples and like actual real life examples that like people can kind of understand. Like, what do you mean? Because like, when we just say we're not inclusive, it's like, what do I need to change? So like, yeah, it is complicated. And yeah, I appreciate it, I guess.
Yeah, like, and definitely, yeah, I could go on, but like I got into a piece of equipment and it didn't fit right, and they were like, yeah, you can do it. And I was like, yeah, I can do it. And then I like almost like really hurt myself. So yeah, that's a barrier, right? I don't want to go back and do that again. So having that knowledge from the leader, having the equipment, having accessible facility, those things they're key to any quality program. So you have to have those.
Yeah, awesome. Steph, what are your thoughts on this? Just around any experiences you've come into where, not realizing either the organization did offer an inclusive sport opportunity and kind of going like, oh, like you guys are doing this, or the opposite where you're like, oh, I thought you were doing this, and speaking to that.
Yeah, I think Paul hit the nail on the head there with the idea that it's all relative. Like what's inclusive and accessible to me might not be to the other able-bodied person that's right next to me. So really, it sometimes like you can look and see a visible difference in a person's ability level. Again, if they're able-bodied, if they're in a wheelchair, you can see that. And still, what might be accessible to one person in a wheelchair might not be accessible to another person who might either push or use a motorized wheelchair. So I think that's the big piece to take a look at, which is really hard often for our organizations to navigate. Is that, again, Paul, what do you say, 178 barriers?
Yeah.
Like that's a lot of barriers to look at. And I find a lot of the times when we look at inclusive opportunities for sport, it's we look at what's the initial barrier. Initial barrier might be registration, or it might be finances through kids sports support, or basically getting people in the door. But sometimes even once we get them in the door, is the organization ready to set them, or is it organization ready to accept them and have a successful experience with them? And that's the big piece. So when we have them in the door, maybe it's a language barrier, maybe it's a transportation barrier, maybe it's an equipment barrier, maybe it's a physical barrier. But all those pieces are really hard for an organization that is often a volunteer run organization that's also looking after potentially 500 other children within their programming as well, and trying to adapt what it is. So to Paul's even earlier point on there's standalone programs and then there's inclusive programs, and each have their set of pros and cons. But the biggest one going back to that individual safety right off the bat. And sometimes that things that we think are to the point relatively easy in an able-bodied sport of, okay, well, I don't have a ball glove. Here, use this ball glove. That's probably going to work. But to Paul's point, using somebody else's wheelchair is probably not going to work. So it's not the same offer, even though we might think it is the same. I have equipment that you can use. Well, yeah, you do, but it just doesn't still fit it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times we do try to adapt as we go as organizations, that we are inclusive. We do want as many people in the door. as possibly can. But with that, are we actually set up to support them? And I think that's the big thing on it, going back to that idea of being proactive in advance. And it's a really tough thing to do on your organization. So I think if they could try to their best to accommodate with the resources and time what they have, but I think it is kind of more leveled structures of support to say, how do we make sure that that's a consistent expectation, either across sport or across community, that the experience that you have is a positive one coming in and not one that, like Paul said, I'm not going to come back to that again. Because that's what we want. We want more people to say yes to sport, but unless we figure out those 178 barriers, it might be a really hard thing to do. But maybe it's not 178 barriers, as Paul said as well. Maybe it is, okay, what's the top 3 barriers that are the really hard thing to work on this program? And we prioritize those, maybe either as a club or as a community, that we know that this is the biggest kind of area that we are lacking in terms of inclusivity. And then how do we work towards those? So it's a little by little approach. We know we can't build things in a day. We can't change the entire system right off the bat, but if we can gradually poke away, and I think the big part of that as well is the opportunity to share across both within one community, but then across the bigger sport community, to say, these are the tricks of the trade that work really well when you're doing something like this, or here's stuff that is going to go really wrong, or from experience that is really wrong if we do stuff like this. So I think that sharing and networking and the connecting of the first voices of people who are experiencing it, but then also of here's how we even got those first voices to begin with, to make sure that we are being proactive in getting there. Even that's a challenge from some organizations. Well, how do we even collect the information from the participants so that then we know how to best support them? Some are doing it really well, which is great. So then how do we make sure that we transfer that across the board? Because sometimes I unfortunately, and Paul can obviously speak to this way more than I can, is that you sometimes don't know until you actually get there. And then if it's something that you had your heart set on as a little kid, that this is something now I get to participate in, and it's not as awesome as you thought it was, that's a real big letdown. And that's what we want to try to avoid in all cases, of how do you make sure that experience is one that we keep people coming back to. And I think that's looking at different levels of structural support to make sure that it is consistent across the province, because some places really good and other places it's like, that could be so much better. But again, everybody's trying their best with what they have. So it's, again, how do we just build people up together with the knowledge that we do have across the board as well.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on what you said there about, we talk about the barriers, and there's 178. They group them into 10. So there's let's say there's 10 bigger ones. And but we just talk about barriers, and we all want to know those. But for some people listening, it just sound like, oh my gosh, there's so much barriers, I'm not getting into this. So, but there's a way through it, and it's really just by doing the best you can, being as prepared, doing a little study on it, and then when they show up, having that communication. A lot of people, volunteers, are afraid to say something wrong or make it worse or make themselves look silly. But if you say the wrong thing, just say, oh, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I'm learning, and that's okay. I think the person who shows up is going to, be forgiving and things like that. So as long as you're open and, communicating that you're learning too.
And I think to that point, Paul, too, is the organization's offering that opportunity in advance of the programming. So it's not showing up on the first day and figuring out that things don't work. It's saying, okay, if you do need additional supports or resources, or you need something, let us know in advance. And so that way we can kind of work with you on what those specific barriers are, so that when you do arrive at the field, the rink, the gym, whatever, that we do have at least those couple top priorities figured out. And as we figure out more things, saying, okay, let's now make a commitment to make sure we continue that. And I think as we see that coming, again, little by little, it does get contagious, because once you have that standard of, well, wheelchair basketball is like this and it's super good, but then when I go over to the sledge program over here, it's not. Well, then you start looking to the sledge program to say, hey, how can we kind of take you up to the level of where wheelchair basketball is, to try to make those all come up together. So whatever experience you go to, you're getting kind of that same positive feedback of we want you here, and we want to figure out how to keep you here as well.
Yeah, and I think to that point, that's where I'm hearing this theme from both of your conversations, just around the importance of communication, because we are all in this learning state. This is a very in some ways for a lot of people a new conversation. Everyone's just going into the waters with it, and so they're just okay, what direction do I go in to start? And so I think the message here is, just start by communicating with whoever your community member is, right? Start engaging with, what is it you're looking for? What supports do you need in order to be successful at XYZ. And like, I think like that transparency and conversation like does go a really long way. But it is for some people really scary to start that conversation too, right? So recognizing like from like our positions, especially like how do we support organizations of feeling comfortable and confident, or like that's what I always think about is like how can I make you feel comfortable and confident to have those conversations with your community members. So definitely a lot of work to still be done, but like we're optimistic. At least that's the sense I'm getting at this table is we can still be optimistic about it. So thank you so much for that. And Mallory, I'll hand it over for the final question of today.
Awesome. I think we've kind of touched on this question a little bit, so it'll be interesting to dive specifically into it, but kind of getting into the awareness of everything. Like we know communities recognize the importance of building within like underrepresented groups as we're talking about. And so in mainstream sport and recreation opportunities, kind of how can we build awareness and what's the beginning to provide, what do you guys have like advice wise to provide an organization trying to demonstrate inclusivity? I know Paul, you kind of touched on social media or media in general, and we're all kind of talking about registration, anything like that. Like how do you start to get somebody in the door? Steph, I'll go ahead and let you kind of start with this one. Sorry, well, hopefully she doesn't steal the thunder, but we'll give Steph a go.
Thanks, Mallory. I think the couple of things that I look at is be proactive, going back to that piece of seeing what you can do in advance as opposed to reacting when a situation comes up to you. So whether it be, again, getting information that will help support the participant experience, working and supporting coaches either through coach education and training and opportunities that are specific to either athletes with a disability or targeted athletes as well, to make sure that they have a level of comfort. But also to Paul's point, like, you might take a course, but you still might feel like you're going to be awkward and ask the wrong question or say something the wrong way. So it's providing that space to make sure that we are all learning and knowing that they're, again, little by little. And I guess that would be my second little piece of advice on it is little by little, is the idea that we kind of have to be aware of relatively where we're at, but then also the possibility of where we want to go as well. So again, we would all agree here across the board that there's plenty of things that we can do to be better, and better is good. So as long as we kind of keep on moving that bar and we don't find ourselves complacent saying, okay, well, we did do that wheelchair basketball program really well, for example, we're good with where it's at, say, no, well, how can we continue to work with our participants or our organization to say how we keep on making that a better experience? And the last thing I'd kind of say too is like the idea of it's way better to go along with others than do it alone. So whether it is other community sport organizations within the area that might have experience, other professionals in the community that might either have direct or indirect experience, either from job roles or volunteer gigs or just personal experience based on the family group that they represent, or service providers within the communities as well. If there are service providers that directly support underrepresented groups in which you're working with them, it's looking to establish relationships, and on top of that, processes to best support the group based on their specific needs. Because otherwise we like, often there's a lot of good intents that we're going to do this program for this group, but it's doing this program with this group as opposed to for them. So it's kind of taking the step back of saying, okay, where are we at now? Where do we want to go together? And then how do we make sure that you're part of that process along the way? I think also the idea of just being inclusive is the idea of sharing. So having more people around the table and saying what works and what doesn't work is a huge piece. And I know locally here in Antigonish, we hosted just before Christmas, and we just had planning on a meeting yesterday around having a group of organizations together around an accessibility table to say how do we figure it all out together. And that was one of the comments from the organizations was saying, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we're aware that we don't do. We'd love to do a better job, but honestly, sometimes between capacity and resources and time and where to start, it's a really hard thing to figure out by yourself. So the way to do this is actually collectively together. We don't have any answers yet by any means, but we've at least started the conversation. And now we're looking at trying as a community, what are a couple top level priorities that we can maybe support in a different way across organizations. So this is the experience that you get across organizations for the specific priority is really kind of what we're looking at now. So that way we can kind of bring people up and share as we go together. So I'd say that's my big kind of couple of pieces: be proactive little by little and look to see who you can connect with, and remember success is success. So we want to keep on building things forward as we move.
Yeah, I love that there, what you said, Steph, kind of about just the whole general idea of being inclusive. We may be doing, like you said, wheelchair basketball, but there's somebody down the road, around the corner within the municipality, or even a little farther of a reach within your region who's kind of trying to operate another sport. But let's try and pull on those connects, those opportunities that you know that exist within the community, and how can they help you grow? Because like you said, we're all in this together, and let's build with each other little by little. So yeah, excellent. Thanks, Steph.
I have a quick
Paul,
question.
over to you. What do you have around advice for kind of building the awareness?
I will let Cassie, I think she was gonna ask.
Just one quick question I have for Steph. I just like, I'm
Sure.
curious because I know you said you're at the beginning, you're a coach too, or involved in coaching in some capacity. And I'm just curious, like, have you seen any like ways that coaches across different sports can have that networking opportunity? Like, I just wonder sometimes, like, and I'm not very as familiar with the sport world. So I guess it just made my brain go, like, when you're talking about that, like, how do coaches from different, knowing their volunteers, like from different backgrounds, like engage in those conversations across different boards? Like, is there a space for that, or like who creates those kind of spaces for that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because to be honestly, it's just one of those other things, and I don't want to dismiss it, but it's one of those other things to coordinate that takes time on top of everything else that you're coordinating often as a coach or an organization. That's one of the ways I think that us as Sport Nova Scotia has supported at the community level in the last number of years, of bringing people together around specific topics. And Cassie, just through our Sport Hub work that we were talking about on last week, it's a way that we're kind of bringing multiple organizations together around similar gaps and challenges at the community level. So it's basically looking at saying, how do we focus on that access and retention together, whether it be general access for anybody in the community saying, I just simply can't find this information if I'm not a sport person, to maybe something bigger like an accessibility table to figure out how do we do it. So really kind of that's a role that we've played ourselves, recognizing that our community sport volunteers have a lot of asked on them already, and to try to coordinate this on top of it, again, it's just something else that's hard to do. So basically what we're looking at here is that we fully get the commitment that the volunteers are doing. So seeking out those opportunities for us to pull together partners and provide a space, or provide a Zoom room, or provide pizza and beer, or whatever it might be, to have those conversations about how do we do these things better together. I think that's a huge opportunity of one of these things that our Sport Hub work is starting to look at, of those partnering of municipal recreation and community sport together around those common challenges. Again, it might be a common challenge just like board development, but it also is a common challenge like accessibility within an organization. So I think the big part of what we look at it as well is if we are working together, it makes the work a whole lot lighter, but it also makes it a whole lot more fun. And it helps form that greater sense of community at the same time, knowing that you're not the only one. Basically, if you're walking together, it makes way more sense than running alone, especially when it comes to inclusion.
Well, and that's the conversation that I kind of was reflecting on in the back of my head, is your Sport Hub conversation from our past conversations. Because in my mind, I can just see this as kind of this blossoming opportunity in terms of inclusion access to create some consistency in the realm of how it's delivered across sports, going in consistency in processes like registrations, et cetera, et cetera. And I just like kind of got that flavor from both of you today, just as we were talking, and like just seeing like, yeah, like hearing that there's a support that is coming into play to help those volunteer coaches like in that capacity is just really exciting. And I wanted to kind of shine light on that, I guess, in this conversation. But so thank you. Sorry, Mallory.
And I just to build on that too, like we haven't done a whole lot of work in this space yet, to be honest. Like, again, we just had one conversation before Christmas. We just had another planning meeting the other day about 2 spring events that are going to happen around the inclusion and access lens for our organizations together. And it's just trying to say it's little by little. It's putting it together to figure out how we all come at it in the same way, and support them. Really supporting one another is really the whole goal from it, and recognizing that we're not all good at all things, but if we can kind of divide ourselves up by the assets, and if we're all kind of learning from those that do different parts well, and we can share that across our organizations, I think we have a whole lot better opportunity to be successful than trying to do every little bit of it by ourselves.
And in my role, like, I know the biggest ask is from partners is those networking opportunities. So I think the fact that you guys are spending the time on that to navigate what that looks like, and what conversations we had is going in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of amazing. Like when we pulled that table together just before Christmas, we had about 12 organizations sitting around the table, which was great, just chatting on it. Like, honestly, besides hosting the conversation and putting up one question, and listening and learning a lot, they're like, we just let them go because like this is what they experience this every day, and trying to figure out how to navigate it a whole lot better is something that they're definitely trying to do, but also conscious of the time and resources it takes. So how do we figure out where to do it? We provide the space and they go because this is the area of expertise, and then we figure out where the areas to support are from simply listening and being part of that conversation as well.
Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, like you guys said, like somebody knows something, everybody kind of knows a little something about this world, and so it's kind of finding those key partners within your area or even outside of your area, of course, who can kind of help you continue to grow. But yeah, back to you, Paul. I'll kind of toss it over to you to kind of reflect on your awareness or how we can help any multi-sport or CSO, anything like that, become aware of kind of building and trying to demonstrate inclusivity.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just so enthralled with what's happening in Antigonish with the hub and everything, and what an opportunity this, the co-op providing all this. And there is actually this National Parasport Collective that happens, and there's like 40 people, some of the best brains in the country, and they're putting together like this education for community organizations to deliver inclusive programming. So it's like it's kind of in depth. It's about 3 months long, but they go over like how to promote and make it safe and everything. So I don't know, maybe the hub can take some like steal from them, because they definitely have some really good learnings to share. So but I would say, like, when I first started here in Sport Nova Scotia and promoting the inclusion opportunities, I think it was like relationships and trust with your stakeholders is really key, because one person can yell as much as they want, but you really need to have your echo chambers, your partners that will kind of relay the message out. So work hard at your community partners, and like, got like Easter Seals Nova Scotia, the rehab, IWK out in the areas. You'll have your health authorities. There's usually a couple like organizations that will offer services to people with disabilities. So really connect to those people, so that when you send out those newsletters or Facebook posts, that it will be reshared. So it really does hit the end consumer to let them make the choice. So, and then what does that look like? Usually it doesn't have to be Facebook. I'm older, so that's what I say, but obviously there's a lot more choices, but usually it's kind of like, you have a short time to capture the people's attentions online, right? So it's got to be like a one pager, flashy kind of thing, but it has to be readable, right? So you have to make sure it's like the color contrast is readable for people with visual impairments, a screen reader, alternative text. And then if you can have a picture of local people in your facility. And that's kind of hard to find too, of a good quality. Someone who's looking to get involved in parasport and they see a picture of some Olympian, like, yeah, they just don't connect with that. So I would say, don't do that. We're grassroots. People that will go through the high performance, that's great. They'll find their way. They're not going to be stopped. But really what we want to do is promote the grassroots, I would say. So that's kind of like knowing what you want, right, as an organization, and how to offer it. And then even words like parasport can be confusing, right? Some people hear parasport and they're like, Paralympics. No thanks. But really, it's just adapted sport. So you have to educate and do all this in like one pager. So it's a little challenging. So, and I think that's why the picture really speaks, because you can, 1,000 words in a picture. So then you want to get that out and share it all around. You've got newsletters, sharing to your partnerships. Make sure you don't get into like, don't fall into it's called, what's it called? Inspiration porn. It's an older term now, but that's just, using people with disabilities to inspire able-bodied people. Like, who is your end audience? Is it other able-bodied people and just to get people to look at it? Or is it for the people with disabilities to actually get them to sometimes get off the couch and get out of this inactive lifestyle and start being more, active? And then you can take those posters and put them, there's libraries and hospitals and the bulletin boards is nonstop. And then there's the radio and TV and print, but sometimes those messages are kind of just on high performance or that inspiration as well. So, but that's what a lot of the public will understand. They see the, the commercials, they're tear jerking and everything. It evokes a response. So I wouldn't rely on that. So one of the best things though is providing like a have a go day. So you work with a CSO or a PSO, they want to do better. You team up with the parasport coordinator because it's a shared thing. Like we can't expect everybody to know all these things. So you work together and you have a good location, you got a good leader, good equipment, and it's a good safe activity to do. And then you have like some people there, like maybe some past athletes as ambassadors. You invite people, they have that first welcoming experience. It's inclusive. You're getting to know people's names, you're smiling. And that's where you're going to hook them and you're going to get them if it's a good experience. So for me, that's what it's all about as the parasport coordinator, like having people's first involvement as a positive one. And then they're more apt to tell their friends who have similar disabilities, maybe not always, but sometimes. And that there's nothing more powerful than the word of mouth from your peer. So if you're like, oh, I never thought sports was for me, and then your buddy over there is saying, oh, it's so good, they do this, love it, and they can't shut up. You're like, oh my gosh, I guess I got to go do this now. So quality parasports will sell itself. It's just a matter of building that capacity and getting the awareness so that people will go and try it.
Absolutely.
I have a question for you, Paul. As you're talking, oh no, it's gonna lose me. The first conversation just around language, like I definitely kind of echo that, like around like, yeah, what does it mean between adaptive sport and parasport, and which term do, and kind of having almost a justification as an organization for why each term is utilized. But I remember when you talk about try it days, one of the like, I don't want to say like negative connotations that I see, but sometimes I'm hearing now that like there is this kind of, hardship that there's this try it day, they get all those partners involved, people come out, they try the sport, it's great, they love it. And then those supports all leave. And then sometimes the partner that's actually the community partner that's there, might not have the capacity or the confidence to necessarily run it without those partners of that try it day. And then it's like everyone got this flavor of something great that they're like, oh, we love this, we want it. And then the community's like, oh, well, maybe next year we'll do another day of this. And it's just like, how do you, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, because that's something that I'm hearing that I'm like, how do we, that sustainability piece, I guess, is something that I'm hearing, like, how do we do that sustainability piece?
Well, I mean, I've heard where we've done try-its or demonstrations in other parts of the province, and then they went away, and it's just like you said, they're like, oh, thanks for nothing. Like, you got us all excited, and you left, and it's like, oh, great. So yeah, I would say that you got like best practice. You want to have a sustainable program. Like I'm always thinking like we're kicking off a program, and we're going to start with a try-it and have a big blitz with a plan to actually offer it after. I'm not just doing try-its and then going to the next place and saying, bye-bye, good luck with that. So yeah, that's to your point, just be smart about it, because you're right, it can do more harm. It really caused a lot of anger, I think, that it happened. But also there's, like for some people, like they don't know, right? And you bring it in and then you show parasport, like at that same event, I bet you some people were like, oh, wow, I didn't know this was a thing. And now I'm going to do this on my own. And like, it's raised their awareness. So I bet you it wasn't all bad. So
No.
That's the complicated part of it all. There's pros and cons. So depends who you're talking to.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, I think like this has been really helpful, and like I guess like, you've given lots of advice and your own kind of perspectives, and I think that's just super helpful as our audience listening in are really looking for those tidbits of information of or those tangible takeaways or things we can start applying or having a conversation around at their own tables. And really, that's what this conference is all about, is just giving perspective. So thank you for sharing your perspective today. I think it's been very enlightening and just, yeah, it gives a lot to think about in terms of like promoting it and kind of, putting the time and thought into actually thinking about, okay, what are the long-term goals for our, as an organization for this program? And what are the pieces that we want to do well, recognizing that there's so many barriers that can be addressed. So, where is that starting point? And I think, yeah, we've spoken some ways on how to address that. So thank you both for your time. And thanks, Mallory, for being my co-host today. It was really nice just to have everyone join. And I think, hopefully I can say this, but, I think people will be reaching out to you after this conference or series is, put up, because I think people will have more questions on the things that you guys are doing. So thanks.
Yeah, please reach out. That'd be great. Thank you very much, Cassie, Mallory.
You guys have been awesome. It's been great conversation. Love hearing it. Paul, I think when you spoke about getting somebody within your community who you actually recognize on the media, on the social media aspect, I think that really kind of hits the nail on the head, and it will allow people to be more comfortable to come out, because that's kind of where it all starts. So yeah, thank you both. This has been great conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you guys all. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to today's conversation on Influencing the Shift 3.0. Influencing the Shift would not be possible without the Northern Inclusion Access Committee. Its representatives are made up from varying organizations within the northern region of Nova Scotia, including partners from East Hants, Colchester, Pictou, and Cumberland counties. These partners identified a gap in service delivery within the sport and recreation sector when providing opportunities for persons living with disability. We all play an important role in shifting towards a more inclusive sport and recreation sector for individuals with varying abilities. Let's start by influencing the shift.